Chapter 1. Welcome to the Lost World. Take a slow, comfortable breath and let yourself settle in. Tonight, we're going somewhere very few people ever think about. Not to a famous empire like Rome. Not to the pyramids of Egypt. Not even to castles filled with kings and knights. Instead, we're searching for something quieter. A forgotten kingdom. A place that was once full of life, laughter, busy streets, and glowing fires after sunset. Kingdom where children ran through markets, farmers worked rich fields, merchants carried goods from far away, and rulers believed their home would stand forever. And yet, today almost nobody remembers it. No crowds visit its streets. No flags wave above its walls. The voices that once filled its cities have been silent for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. It's almost as if the kingdom simply stepped off the map. Now don't worry. We're not about to run through dark caves carrying a torch while dramatic music plays. This isn't one of those adventures where someone says, "We should definitely split up." History has taught us that's usually a terrible idea. Instead, we'll walk slowly. We'll take our time. Think of this journey as a peaceful evening walk through the past. History is filled with places that disappeared. Some were destroyed by war, others slowly, emptied after years of drought. Some changed because rivers moved, trade routes shifted, or people simply left in search of better lives. Sometimes, a city doesn't fall in one dramatic day. Sometimes it fades, like footprints on a beach after the tide comes in. That's what makes these forgotten places so fascinating. They remind us that even the biggest cities, the richest rulers, and the strongest walls cannot stop time forever. Imagine standing on a quiet hill just before sunrise. The air is cool. Mist hangs low across the valleys. Birds are beginning to wake. First, all you see are trees. Then, little by little, shapes begin to appear beneath the vines. A stone wall, half of a staircase, the corner of an old tower, the remains of a road leading somewhere no one remembers. Nature has been very busy. Roots have pushed through old buildings. Flowers grow where people once traded spices. Tall trees now stand inside what used to be royal halls. It's almost as if the forest politely said, "Thank you very much. I'll take it from here." And honestly, nature is very patient. Give it enough time, and it can turn almost anything back into a garden. As we continue walking, imagine finding pieces of everyday life. A broken clay cup, a smooth stone used for grinding grain, a tiny bead that once belonged to someone's necklace. These objects may seem small, but together they whisper something important. Real people lived here. Someone laughed here. Someone argued about the price of bread here. Someone probably woke up late one morning and blamed the rooster. Some things never change. History often focuses on great rulers and famous battles. But most people were just people. Parents worried about their children. Farmers hoped for rain. Merchants hoped customers would actually pay on time. Builders hoped their walls wouldn't fall over before the king came to inspect them. Life wasn't so different from ours in many ways. Only the clothes looked different, and perhaps there were a few more goats walking through town. The strange thing about forgotten kingdoms is that they rarely knew they were becoming forgotten. Imagine asking one of the citizens, "Do you think people will remember this place in 1,000 years?" they would probably smile. Of course they will. Why wouldn't they? Their city was alive. Their markets were full. Their temples stood proudly. Children were growing up. New houses were being built. Life felt normal. Most people don't wake up expecting to become history. That's one reason these stories feel so powerful. They remind us that history isn't made only by great moments. It's made by ordinary mornings, ordinary conversations, ordinary people living ordinary lives. Until one day, things begin to change. Maybe the rains come later than usual. Maybe traders stop arriving. Maybe harvests become smaller. Maybe a neighboring kingdom grows stronger. No single event seems large enough to matter, but together they slowly reshape the future, like tiny drops of water carving a canyon over many years. The kingdom doesn't notice at first. Life continues. Festivals are still celebrated. Markets still open. Children still play. People still make plans for next year. And perhaps that's the saddest part. No one realizes they are living in the final peaceful chapter. If you've ever looked at an old family photograph, you probably know the feeling. Everyone in the picture is smiling. No one knows what the future holds. That photo quietly becomes more valuable with every passing year. Ancient cities are a little like that. Archaeologists often discover beautiful objects buried beneath layers of earth. A coin, a piece of painted pottery, carved statue. Each discovery feels like opening a tiny window into another world. But there are always questions. Who dropped this? Who built this? Why did they leave? Where did everyone go? Sometimes we find answers. Sometimes we don't. And that's perfectly okay. Mysteries have a special way of keeping history alive. If we already knew every answer, there would be nothing left to wonder about. Tonight, we're beginning a journey into one of those mysteries. We'll follow old roads that no map shows anymore. We'll visit places where grass grows between ancient stones. We'll meet rulers whose names have almost faded away. We'll see how a kingdom rose from a quiet land, became a place of great hope, and then slowly disappeared until only whispers remained. Not because magic carried it away, not because dragons flew overhead. History is usually much quieter than that, and somehow that makes it even more amazing. So as the evening grows darker, and the stars slowly appear overhead, let the busy thoughts of today drift away. Our path stretches gently forward. The forgotten kingdom is waiting, and in the next chapter we'll travel back to a time before its first walls were built, before its rulers wore crowns, and before anyone could imagine that this peaceful land would one day become one of history's greatest mysteries. The story of every great kingdom begins in a surprisingly simple way. Not with a king, not with a grand palace, not with a golden crown shining in the sun. It begins with the land itself. Long before anyone dreamed of building walls or raising flags, this place belonged only to nature. The rivers flowed where they pleased. The forests stretched for miles without a single road cutting through them. Mountains stood quietly on the horizon, watching the seasons come and go year after year, century after century. If you could stand here at that time, you would hear no busy markets and no ringing bells. Instead, you would hear the sound of water moving over smooth stones, birds greeting the morning, and leaves gently dancing in the wind. It would be peaceful. the kind of peaceful that is becoming harder to find today. As the sun climbed into the sky each morning, a soft mist would rise from the river. Tiny drops of water would sparkle in the first light, making the whole valley look almost magical. Deer would come to drink at the water's edge. Fish would swim through the clear streams. Eagles circled high above, searching for their breakfast. Nature had everything it needed. It wasn't trying to impress anyone. It was simply being itself. The forests were thick with tall trees whose branches reached toward the clouds. In the spring, colorful flowers covered the forest floor. In summer, the leaves formed a cool green roof that shaded the ground below. Autumn painted everything in warm shades of gold and red, while winter wrapped the valley in silence. The seasons followed one another like old friends who never missed an appointment. The story of every great kingdom begins in a surprisingly simple way. Not with a king, not with a grand palace, not with a golden crown shining in the sun. It begins with the land itself. Long before anyone dreamed of building walls or raising flags, this place belonged only to nature. The rivers flowed where they pleased. The forests stretched for miles without a single road cutting through them. Mountains stood quietly on the horizon, watching the seasons come and go year after year, century after century. If you could stand here at that time, you would hear no busy markets and no ringing bells. Instead, you would hear the sound of water moving over smooth stones, birds greeting the morning, and leaves gently dancing in the wind. It would be peaceful, the kind of peaceful that is becoming harder to find today. As the sun climbed into the sky each morning, a soft mist would rise from the river. Tiny drops of water would sparkle in the first light, making the whole valley look almost magical. Deer would come to drink at the water's edge. Fish would swim through the clear streams. Eagles circled high above, searching for their breakfast. Nature had everything it needed. It wasn't trying to impress anyone. It was simply being itself. The forests were thick with tall trees whose branches reached toward the clouds. In the spring, colorful flowers covered the forest floor. In summer, the leaves formed a cool green roof that shaded the ground below. Autumn painted everything in warm shades of gold and red, while winter wrapped the valley in silence. The seasons followed one another like old friends who never missed an appointment. No one needed a calendar. Nature kept perfect time. Of course, living here wasn't always easy. Heavy rains could turn peaceful rivers into rushing floods. Long dry seasons tested every plant and animal. Storms rolled across the mountains without asking anyone's permission. Weather has always had a funny habit of doing exactly what it wants. Even today, we check the forecast, and the weather sometimes smiles politely before doing something completely different. Thousands of years ago, people had even less control over it. For a long time, only small groups of travelers passed through this valley. They did not stay forever. These early people followed the seasons, moving from place to place in search of food, clean water, and safe shelter. Their lives were simple but demanding. Every day meant finding enough to eat. Every night meant staying warm and protected. There were no comfortable houses waiting for them, no grocery stores, and definitely no food delivery. If someone wanted dinner, they had to work for it. These travelers learned to understand the land better than anyone else. They knew where fish gathered in the rivers. They knew which plants were safe to eat and which ones were better left alone. They watched the stars at night and used them to guide their journeys. The land slowly became a trusted friend. Generation after generation passed these lessons to their children. Then something interesting began to happen. Some families noticed that this valley offered everything they needed. Fresh water flowed all year. The soil near the river was rich and soft. Wild animals were plentiful. Trees provided wood for fires and shelter. Instead of passing through, they stayed. Not everyone at once, just a few families at first. They built small shelters using branches, stone, and mud. Nothing fancy, just enough to keep out the rain and the cold wind. Smoke drifted gently from simple fireplaces as evening settled. Across the valley, for the first time, the land had permanent neighbors. As the years passed, these tiny homes became small villages. Children who had once been carried across the valley now ran through fields they considered home. Parents planted crops instead of searching for wild plants every day. They discovered that seeds placed in the ground could grow into food for the future. It must have felt like an incredible discovery. Plant today, eat months later. Simple, but powerful. Soon they grew grains, beans, and other crops that could feed many people. They also cared for animals instead of always hunting them. Goats, sheep, and cattle became part of everyday life. Morning no longer began with a long journey. It began with feeding animals, checking crops, and greeting neighbors. Slowly, life became more predictable. With steady food came something new. Time. People finally had moments that weren't spent simply surviving. Some became skilled at making pottery. Others shaped stone tools with amazing precision. Few learned how to weave cloth from plant fibers. Every person added something useful to the growing community. No one could do everything alone. Together, they became stronger. The villages also learned an important lesson. Sharing often worked better than fighting. One village might have excellent hunters. Another had rich farmland. Another had skilled builders. Instead of taking from one another by force, they often traded. A basket of grain for strong tools. Fresh fish for warm blankets. Clay pots for beautiful woven cloth. Everyone gained something. Of course, people have always enjoyed a little friendly bargaining. Someone probably looked at a basket of apples and said, "That's worth 2 pots." The other person almost certainly replied, "2? You're dreaming. 1 pot and a loaf of bread." Some conversations never change, no matter what century you live in. As trade grew, small paths connected the villages. These simple trails wound through forests, crossed streams, and climbed gentle hills. People who had once known only their own village now visited neighbors more often. Ideas traveled along these paths as easily as goods. New farming methods, new stories, new songs, new friendships. The valley was becoming more connected every year. The elders noticed something changing. The villages no longer felt separate. They depended on one another. When one harvest failed, another village shared its grain. When storms damaged homes, neighbors helped rebuild them. When celebrations arrived, everyone gathered together. Little by little, trust replaced distance. It wasn't perfect. People argued from time to time. Neighbors disagreed. Leaders debated. Someone's goats probably wandered into someone else's crops now and then, creating a conversation that was, let's say, less than cheerful. But overall, cooperation proved stronger than conflict. As generations passed, children grew up hearing stories about the valley. They learned that this land was special, not because it held hidden treasure or magical powers, but because it gave people the chance to build a peaceful life together. The forests protected them. The river fed them. The mountains watched over them like quiet old guardians. Without realizing it, these small villages were laying the foundation for something much greater. No one announced it. No one held a grand ceremony. There wasn't a sign saying, "Future kingdom under construction." History usually doesn't work that way. Instead, change arrived one quiet day after another. One family became two. Two villages became five. Five became 10. Trade grew stronger. Friendships spread farther. The people slowly began to think of themselves not as strangers living nearby, but as part of the same land. Soon, they would need leaders to settle disagreements, organize trade, and protect the growing communities. The peaceful valley that had once belonged only to rivers, forests, and wandering travelers was about to enter a new chapter. And before long, the first ruler would rise, not through great conquest, but through the trust of the people who already called this beautiful land home. The years passed quietly, just as they always had. Spring followed winter. Summer warmed the fields. Autumn filled the storage houses with grain. And winter invited everyone to gather around warm fires, sharing stories that grew a little more exciting each time they were told. Under Aaron's steady leadership, the valley was changing. Not all at once. Not with loud celebrations or grand announcements, but one careful step at a time. The villages that once stood apart now worked together as if they were branches of the same great tree. Farmers shared new ways to grow crops. Builders traveled from one village to another, teaching better ways to shape stone and timber. Traders carried not only food and tools but also ideas. And as often happens, good ideas spread faster than wagons. Soon, the elders began discussing something that had never been needed before. A central place. A town where everyone could gather. A place where traders could meet, leaders could speak, craftsmen could work, and festivals could bring the whole valley together. Choosing the location was not easy. Everyone had an opinion. One farmer wanted it closer to the richest fields. A fisherman preferred the riverbank. Hunters argued for higher ground near the forests. If ancient people had possessed neighborhood meetings like we do today, they probably would have lasted all weekend. In the end, Aaron suggested a wide piece of land beside the river, where the ground was flat. The soil was strong, and fresh water flowed throughout the year. It was a place where roads from every village naturally crossed. The elders agreed. Before long, workers from across the valley arrived with simple tools made of wood, stone, and early metal. Some carried heavy logs on their shoulders. Others shaped large stones with patient hands. Teams worked from sunrise until the evening sky turned orange. There were no giant machines, no roaring engines, just people helping one another. The first buildings were practical rather than beautiful. A meeting hall stood at the center, built with thick wooden beams and a wide roof to protect people from the rain. Nearby, workers dug a deep well so everyone would have fresh water, even during the dry season. Around the meeting hall, small homes slowly appeared. Each family built their house a little differently. Some had walls made from packed earth. Others used carefully stacked stone. Roofs were covered with reeds, straw, or wooden shingles depending on what materials were easiest to find. Little by little, narrow footpaths connected one home to another. Those paths became streets. The streets became neighborhoods. Without anyone planning it, the first town was being born. Every morning, the quiet sound of nature was joined by something new. The tapping of hammers, the scraping of stone, the laughter of workers, children chasing one another through unfinished streets, dogs barking at absolutely nothing, as dogs have proudly done throughout history. The town felt alive. Builders also understood something important. Water was life. So they dug shallow channels that carried fresh river water toward nearby fields. These simple irrigation canals helped farmers grow more food than ever before. With larger harvests came fuller storage houses. And with fuller storage houses came confidence. People no longer worried only about surviving the next season. Now they could think about the future. Some imagined larger homes. Others dreamed of new workshops. A few even wondered what lay beyond the distant mountains. As more people settled in the growing town, different skills began to appear. One man became known for making the strongest clay pots in the valley. A woman crafted beautiful woven cloth with patterns no one had seen before. An elderly stoneworker carved smooth pillars that seemed almost impossible to shape using such simple tools. Each craft made the community stronger. The town wasn't rich yet, but it was becoming something far more valuable. It was becoming organized. And without realizing it, these hard-working families were laying the first stones of a civilization that future generations would one day remember, if only in whispers. As the first town continued to grow, something wonderful began to happen. People no longer came only because they lived nearby. They came because they had heard stories. Travelers spoke of a peaceful place where fresh water never seemed to run dry. Merchants talked about honest trading. Builders shared news of new homes rising beside the river. Farmers spoke of rich soil that rewarded hard work. The valley was quietly earning a good reputation, and in the ancient world, that was worth more than the loudest advertisement. With more people arriving, the town needed a proper place where everyone could meet. So, near the center of the settlement, the builders cleared a wide open space. At first it was nothing, more than packed earth, but before long it became the heart of the community. This was the market square. Every few days, the quiet streets filled with life. Farmers arrived before sunrise with baskets of grain, vegetables, and fruit. Fishermen carried their fresh catch from the river. Shepherds brought wool, cheese, and milk. Potters displayed rows of smooth clay jars, while skilled woodworkers laid out bowls, stools, and carved toys for children. The air was filled with friendly conversation. People greeted neighbors they had not seen in weeks. Children ran from stall to stall, their eyes wide with curiosity. Somewhere, someone was almost certainly trying to convince a customer that one chicken was somehow worth the price of 3. Some business tricks are older than history itself. The market was more than a place to buy and sell. It was where stories traveled. Travelers shared news from distant lands. Songs were exchanged between villages. New ideas spread from one conversation to another. Sometimes the greatest treasure a merchant carried was not hidden inside a cart. It was inside a story. As the town prospered, the people decided it was time to build something that represented their shared beliefs. On a gentle rise overlooking the river, they began work on their first temple. It was not covered in gold, nor did it reach toward the clouds. Compared with the great monuments of later civilizations, it was quite modest. Yet to the people who built it, it was magnificent. Each stone was carried by hand. Each wooden beam was carefully placed. Families worked together not because they were ordered to, but because they believed the temple belonged to everyone. When it was finally completed, the temple became a place of quiet reflection. People gathered there to give thanks for successful harvests, to pray during difficult seasons, and to celebrate the changing of the year. Festivals soon became one of the happiest times in the valley. Colorful cloth decorated the streets. Musicians played simple drums and wooden flutes. Families prepared special meals that filled the air with wonderful smells. Children laughed as they played games in the open square, while elders smiled, remembering when this place had been nothing more than an empty field beside the river. It is funny how quickly a place can begin to feel ancient. A building only a few decades old already seemed to carry generations of memories. As life became more comfortable, builders started thinking beyond today's needs. Instead of making narrow paths, they laid out wider streets that allowed wagons to pass one another. Strong wooden bridges replaced simple log crossings over streams. Small stone markers were placed along the roads to help travelers find their way. These improvements may have seemed ordinary, but together they changed everything. Trade became faster. Travel became safer. Neighboring villages felt closer than ever before. The valley was beginning to think as one community instead of many separate settlements. Aaron, now older and slower than when he first accepted the people's trust, often walked through the growing town in the early morning. He rarely traveled with guards. Instead, he greeted the builders, farmers, and shopkeepers by name whenever he could. He believed that a leader should know the people, not simply rule over them. Whether every story about Aaron is true, no one can say for certain. But legends have a way of preserving the kind of leader people wish to remember. And perhaps that tells us something just as important. As evening fell, warm light spilled from hundreds of windows. Smoke drifted gently into the darkening sky. Families gathered around their evening meals, sharing bread, vegetables, roasted fish, and stories from the day's work. From a nearby hill, the town looked like a collection of tiny stars resting beside the river. Peaceful, hopeful, alive. No one could imagine that, many centuries later, these streets would fall silent beneath vines and towering trees. No one believed the market would one day disappear. No one thought the temple would stand empty, visited only by birds and the wind. For the people living here, the future looked bright. The kingdom was no longer just a dream. It was becoming a thriving civilization. And as its buildings grew stronger and its people more confident, everyday life became richer in ways both large and small. In our next chapter, we'll slow our pace even more and spend a full day inside this growing kingdom. We'll walk through its busy markets at sunrise, visit the workshops of talented craftsmen, share a meal with an ordinary family, and discover what daily life was really like for the people who called this remarkable place home. Chapter 5: Daily Life Inside the Kingdom, Part 1. The sun had not yet climbed above the mountains. The sky was still painted in soft shades of deep blue and pale orange, and a cool morning breeze drifted through the streets of the growing kingdom. Most of the town was still asleep, but not for long. One by one, small signs of life began to appear. A rooster proudly announced the start of a new day, convinced that the entire kingdom had been waiting for his permission to wake up. A few sleepy dogs stretched in the middle of the road before deciding they had important dog business to attend to. Thin streams of smoke curled upward as families lit their cooking fires. The kingdom was waking, slowly, peacefully. If we were visitors arriving at this early hour, the first thing we would notice would not be the buildings. It would be the smells. Fresh bread baking over warm stones, porridge gently bubbling in clay pots, herbs picked from nearby gardens. The sweet scent of morning flowers carried by the breeze. Breakfast was simple. Most families ate bread, grains, fruit when it was in season, and sometimes cheese or fish from the river. It was not a feast, but it was enough to give everyone the energy needed for another busy day. Children sat beside their parents, rubbing the sleep from their eyes while quietly eating. Well, mostly quietly. Children have always found ways to make a little noise before breakfast. That appears to be one of history's oldest traditions. As the first rays of sunlight reached the rooftops, the streets slowly filled with people. Farmers left the town carrying wooden tools over their shoulders as they walked toward the rich fields outside the walls. Some traveled with oxen pulling simple carts. Others worked side by side with family members, talking about the day's tasks. The fields surrounding the kingdom were its greatest treasure. Here, wheat, barley, beans, vegetables, and fruit trees provided food for thousands of people. The irrigation canals built years earlier carried fresh river water across the farmland, helping crops survive even when the rains arrived late. The farmers understood something that every generation before them had learned. Nature could be generous, but it always expected patience. Meanwhile, inside the town, another group of workers was just beginning their day. The craftsmen. Their workshops lined several of the main streets, each filled with the sounds of careful work. A potter slowly shaped wet clay on a spinning wheel, turning an ordinary lump of earth into a smooth jar that might hold grain for years. Across the road, a carpenter carefully carved wooden stools, doors, and storage chests. Nearby, a blacksmith stood before a glowing fire, heating metal until it shined bright orange, before shaping it into knives, farming tools, and strong nails with steady blows of his hammer. Clang, clang, clang. The sound echoed gently through the morning air. Not too loud, just enough to remind everyone that another day of work had begun. These craftsmen were respected throughout the kingdom. Their skills took years to master. Many learned from their parents who had learned from their own parents before them. Knowledge was one of the kingdom's greatest treasures. And unlike gold, it became more valuable each time it was shared. As the morning continued, the market square slowly came alive. Merchants rolled open wooden shutters. Colorful cloth was hung above market stalls to provide shade from the afternoon sun. Baskets filled with apples, onions, herbs, nuts, and fresh vegetables appeared one after another. A fisherman proudly displayed the morning's catch. A baker arranged rows of warm bread. A woman carefully placed beautiful woven blankets across a wooden table, each one decorated, with patterns unique to her family. Soon, the quiet square became filled with conversation. Neighbors greeted one another with friendly smiles. Travelers asked for directions. Children wandered from stall to stall, hoping someone might offer a small piece of fruit. Sometimes they succeeded. Sometimes the merchants simply smiled and said, "Nice try." Even thousands of years ago, free samples were never guaranteed. The market was more than a place to shop. It was the heartbeat of the kingdom. Here, news spread faster than anywhere else. Someone announced a successful harvest in a nearby village. Another traveler shared stories about distant mountains. An elderly storyteller gathered curious children beneath the shade of a large tree, telling tales of brave hunters, clever foxes, and the mysterious spirits believed to protect the forests. Whether every story was true hardly mattered. The stories brought people together, and in a kingdom still finding its identity, that was just as important as food, trade, or strong walls. As the morning sun climbed higher into the sky, the streets became busier than ever. Every person had a role. Every task helped another. Like tiny threads woven together, they created something far stronger than any one person could build alone. And as we continue our walk through the kingdom, we'll soon discover how families, teachers, healers, and priests filled the rest of the day with traditions that would shape this remarkable civilization for generations to come. By the time the sun reached its highest point, the kingdom was full of life. The morning rush had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Farmers paused beneath the shade of large trees to enjoy a simple midday meal. Craftsmen wiped the dust from their hands before sharing bread and fresh fruit with their families. Even the market became a little quieter as merchants took turns watching one another's stalls. It was a community where people depended on each other. No one could build a kingdom alone. The farmer needed the blacksmith to repair his tools. The blacksmith needed the carpenter to build a stronger workshop. The carpenter needed the potter for storage jars. And everyone needed the baker. Let's be honest, life is usually better when fresh bread is nearby. After lunch, the streets slowly filled once again. This time, many of the children gathered in the open square. There were no modern classrooms, with rows of desks, but learning happened every single day. Parents taught their children how to care for crops, prepare food, weave cloth, and build useful tools. Elders shared stories about the valley's past, reminding the younger generation where their families had come from and why working together mattered. Some children learned to count by helping merchants at the market. Others practiced drawing simple symbols into soft clay tablets or smooth sand with small wooden sticks. Education was not only about reading or writing. It was about preparing for life. The older children proudly copied the adults, though they sometimes made a few amusing mistakes along the way. A young apprentice might build a stool with one leg just a little shorter than the others. Someone learning pottery might proudly present a bowl that looked, well, a little more like a very surprised pumpkin. Everyone laughed. Then they tried again. That was how skills were passed from one generation to the next. Nearby, the kingdom's healers quietly went about their work. They gathered herbs from the surrounding hills and forests, carefully learning which plants could ease pain, reduce fever, or help wounds heal. While they did not have the scientific knowledge we enjoy today, they observed nature closely. Over many generations, they discovered which remedies seemed to help and which ones were better left alone. The people respected these healers greatly, not because they performed miracles, but because they offered hope. As afternoon slowly turned toward evening, many families visited the temple that overlooked the river. It was not a place of fear. It was a place of gratitude. People gave thanks for healthy children, successful harvests, safe journeys, and peaceful seasons. Priests led simple ceremonies, lighting fragrant herbs whose gentle smoke drifted into the evening air. The temple was also where important moments in life were celebrated. New babies were welcomed into the community. Young couples promised to build their future together. Families remembered loved ones who had passed away, believing their stories should never be forgotten. The kingdom understood something many civilizations have shared throughout history. People live on not only through buildings, but through memories. As the sun slowly disappeared behind the distant mountains, a warm golden light spread across the rooftops. The market stalls closed one by one. Farmers returned from the fields with tired but satisfied smiles. Children, who somehow still seemed to have endless energy, played one last game before being called home for supper. The smell of evening meals once again filled the streets. Stews simmered gently in clay pots. Fresh bread cooled on wooden tables. Fish roasted over open fires. Families gathered together, sharing not only food but stories from their day. One person spoke about a successful trade. Another laughed about a stubborn goat that had escaped, for what was probably the 10th time that month. Someone else proudly announced that their child had finally learned to shape a perfect clay bowl. Small victories mattered. They always have. As darkness settled over the kingdom, the stars slowly appeared above the valley. Without city lights, the night sky looked endless. People often stepped outside their homes for a few quiet moments before sleep, looking upward at the same stars that shine above us today. They wondered about the future. Would their children live peaceful lives? Would the harvest be good next year? Would this growing kingdom continue to prosper? None of them could know the answers. They believed they were building something that would last forever. And in many ways, they had every reason to believe it. The fields were rich. The people worked together. Trade was growing stronger with every passing season. The kingdom seemed ready for a bright future. But history has a gentle way of reminding us that peaceful times never stand completely still. Beyond the mountains, new roads were opening. Faraway villages were growing into towns. Merchants were traveling farther than ever before, carrying not only goods but ideas, languages, and customs from distant lands. The little kingdom beside the river was about to become part of something much larger. Its quiet markets would soon welcome strangers from places no one in the valley had ever seen. New opportunities were waiting just beyond the horizon. And with those opportunities would come challenges that no one could yet imagine. So, as the cooking fires slowly faded into glowing embers and the kingdom drifted peacefully to sleep, another chapter of its story was already beginning. In our next journey, we'll follow the merchants beyond the valley and discover how trade connected this hidden kingdom to the wider ancient world, bringing wealth, wonder, and the first signs that its destiny would be far greater than anyone had ever dreamed. The kingdom had grown in a quiet and steady way. Its fields were full. Its workshops were busy. Its streets echoed with friendly voices from sunrise until sunset. For many years, this was enough. The people had food to eat, homes to sleep in, and neighbors they could trust. But as often happens in history, someone eventually looked beyond the mountains and wondered, what lies on the other side? It was a simple question. Yet questions like that have changed the world many times. At first, only a handful of merchants traveled beyond the valley. They packed small wooden carts with grain, pottery, woven cloth, dried fruit, and carefully crafted tools. Others loaded goods onto sturdy donkeys or small river boats, depending on where the journey would take them. These trips were not easy. The roads were little more than narrow dirt paths winding through forests and rocky hills. Bridges were rare, so rivers sometimes had to be crossed by shallow fords where the water barely reached a person's knees. When heavy rain arrived, those peaceful crossings could quickly become rushing streams. Nature always had the final vote. Still, the merchants kept traveling. They believed that every difficult road might lead to a new opportunity. Before leaving, families gathered to wish them safe travels. Mothers packed extra bread. Fathers checked wagon wheels one last time. Children waved until the travelers disappeared around the bend in the road. Some journeys lasted only a few days. Others took many weeks. No one knew exactly what they would find. That uncertainty was part of the adventure. As the merchants traveled farther, they discovered that their valley was only one small piece of a much larger world. Beyond the forests were villages built beside sparkling lakes. Beyond the hills were towns surrounded by endless grasslands. Farther still were bustling settlements where people spoke unfamiliar languages and wore clothing unlike anything seen back home. At first, communication was not always easy. Imagine trying to buy a basket of apples when neither person understands the other's words. There was probably quite a bit of smiling, pointing, shrugging, and hoping for the best. Thankfully, a friendly smile has always been understood in almost every language. Trade began simply. A merchant offered several fine clay pots in exchange for polished copper tools. Another traded soft woven blankets for colorful beads carved from bright stones. Grain was exchanged for salt, a valuable treasure that helped preserve food through the long winter months. Each journey brought home something new, not just objects, ideas. The people of the kingdom had believed they knew the best way to build houses. Then they visited another town and discovered stronger roofing techniques. They thought they understood farming well. Then a distant village showed them new ways to rotate crops, keeping the soil rich year after year. Even cooking changed. Travelers returned with unfamiliar herbs and spices that added wonderful new flavors to ordinary meals. Some families loved the new recipes. Others quietly whispered, "I still prefer grandmother's stew." Grandmothers have a remarkable habit of winning those arguments. As trade increased, the roads became busier. The narrow paths connecting the kingdom to distant lands slowly widened. Workers removed large stones from the trails and built stronger wooden bridges over rivers. Resting places appeared along the routes, giving travelers safe places to sleep before continuing their journey. The next morning, little by little, the kingdom became connected to a growing network of trade. The river also played an important role. For centuries, it had quietly watered the fields and provided fresh fish. Now it became a highway. Long wooden boats drifted downstream carrying heavy jars filled with grain, oil, and honey. On the return journey, those same boats arrived carrying copper, fine cloth, colorful dyes, carved ivory, and beautiful gemstones collected from places the people of the valley had never seen. Standing along the riverbank became one of the most exciting parts of the day. Children rushed to watch each boat arrive. What treasures did they bring this time? They wondered. Sometimes it was shiny metal, sometimes strange fruits, sometimes brightly colored birds kept safely inside woven cages. The merchants themselves often became storytellers. As evening settled over the town, people gathered around them to hear tales of distant lands. They spoke of mountains so tall their peaks disappeared into the clouds, of deserts where the sand stretched farther than the eye could see, of great rivers wider than anything back home. Some stories sounded almost unbelievable. A few probably became just a tiny bit more exciting each time they were told. Travelers have been adding a little extra drama to their adventures for thousands of years. It seems to be part of the job. Still, whether every detail was true or not, the stories filled the kingdom with curiosity. The world suddenly felt much larger. Young people dreamed of becoming merchants themselves. Craftsmen worked even harder, knowing that their finest creations might one day be admired in distant cities. Farmers expanded their fields because more mouths and more markets needed feeding. Prosperity slowly spread through the valley. The once hidden kingdom was no longer isolated. Its name was beginning to travel far beyond the mountains, carried by merchants, sailors, and wandering storytellers. It was becoming known as a peaceful place where honest trade, skilled craftsmanship, and warm hospitality welcomed every traveler. But with every wagon that arrived, and every boat that docked, the kingdom was also welcoming something far less visible. New ideas, new beliefs, new ambitions. These gifts would help shape its future in ways no one could yet imagine. And in time, they would change the kingdom forever. As the seasons passed, the trade routes became as familiar as the river itself. Every few weeks, the people of the kingdom would hear the distant sound of wagon wheels, rolling over stone. Before long, a line of travelers would appear on the horizon, slowly making their way toward the town. Some came with carts pulled by sturdy oxen. Others arrived leading long lines of donkeys loaded with baskets and wooden chests. A few merchants came by boat, their sails gently catching the morning breeze as they floated down the river. Each arrival brought excitement. No one knew exactly what treasures would appear next. Perhaps a bundle of soft blue cloth from a distant village. Perhaps bright glass beads that sparkled in the sunlight. Perhaps fragrant spices whose rich aroma filled the air before the bags were even opened. The market square, once filled mostly with local goods, slowly became a colorful window into the wider world. One table displayed smooth copper tools. Another offered finely carved wooden statues. Nearby, merchants carefully unwrapped delicate pottery painted with patterns no one in the kingdom had ever seen before. Children wandered through the market with wide eyes. To them, every trading day felt a little like a festival. And for many adults, it did too. Trade was not only changing what people could buy, it was changing how they thought. Travelers shared songs from distant lands. Musicians listened carefully, then added those melodies to their own celebrations. Artists borrowed new designs for pottery and cloth. Builders admired unusual houses they had seen on their journeys and returned home eager to try fresh ideas. Even language began to change. New words found their way into everyday conversation. Some came from neighboring villages. Others traveled hundreds of miles before settling into the kingdom's speech. History often moves quietly like that, one conversation at a time. As trade continued to grow, the kingdom became wealthier than ever before. New workshops appeared along the main streets. Larger storehouses were built to protect valuable goods from rain and hungry mice. The leaders organized teams to repair roads after storms and keep bridges safe for travelers. The kingdom had learned an important lesson. Good roads were just as valuable as good harvests. After all, merchants could not sell their goods if their wagons became stuck in the mud. The riverbanks also grew busier. Strong wooden docks stretched farther into the water, making it easier for boats to load and unload their cargo. Workers carefully carried heavy jars filled with oil, grain, and honey onto waiting vessels. In return, ships delivered polished metals, rare stones, colorful dyes, and beautiful fabrics, woven in lands far beyond the mountains. Watching the docks became one of the town's favorite evening activities. People gathered simply to see what had arrived. Sometimes the greatest excitement wasn't the cargo at all. It was the visitors. Foreign merchants wore clothing unlike anything the local people had ever seen. Some wrapped bright cloth around their heads to protect themselves from the sun. Others wore long flowing robes decorated with detailed patterns. A few carried musical instruments that produced sounds both strange and beautiful. The kingdom welcomed them with kindness. Guests were offered fresh water, warm meals, and safe places to sleep. In return, they shared stories of places that sounded almost impossible. Great cities with walls so wide that several wagons could travel side by side. Markets where thousands of people gathered every single day. Libraries filled with scrolls from every corner of the known world. The people listened with wonder. The valley that had once seemed so large now felt like one chapter in a much bigger story. But prosperity has an interesting habit. When life becomes comfortable, people often begin to dream even bigger dreams. Some merchants wanted to travel farther than ever before. Some leaders hoped to build larger buildings and wider roads. Craftsmen searched for finer materials to create even more beautiful work. The kingdom's confidence continued to grow. And confidence can be a wonderful thing, as long as it remembers to walk beside wisdom. Not everyone was certain that endless growth was always a good idea. Some of the oldest villagers quietly noticed small changes. The markets were busier than before. Foreign goods were becoming common. Young people spoke excitedly about distant lands instead of the traditions of their own valley. One elder smiled gently and said, "The river brings many gifts, but it also carries strong currents." It was a simple thought, one that many people politely nodded at before returning to their shopping. After all, life was good. The harvests remained strong. The roads were full. The workshops were busy from sunrise until sunset. Why worry about tomorrow when today felt so peaceful? Yet history often reminds us that every great civilization reaches a moment when wealth alone is no longer enough. People begin asking deeper questions. Who are we? Where did we come from? What powers guide the seasons, the stars, and the rivers that give us life? As trade connected the kingdom with distant cultures, it also introduced new beliefs, new ceremonies, and new ways of understanding the world. Some traditions blended together. Others remained proudly unique. The people found themselves thinking not only about building stronger homes, but also about building stronger spirits. Temples became busier. Festivals grew larger. Old stories were told beside new ones brought by travelers from faraway lands. The kingdom was entering a new chapter, not one shaped by roads or markets, but by faith, tradition, and the search for meaning. So tonight, as the last trading boat disappears beyond the bend in the river and the market, grows quiet beneath a sky filled with stars, let us leave the busy streets behind. In our next chapter, we'll step inside the kingdom's sacred places, where a flickering torchlight, gentle songs, and ancient rituals reveal the beliefs that guided the hearts of its people for generations. As the kingdom grew richer through trade, the people found themselves asking questions that no merchant could answer. Where did the river begin? Who painted the stars across the night sky? Why did spring always return after the cold days of winter? The elders believed that every part of nature carried a quiet spirit. The river was more than water flowing over smooth stones. It was the lifeblood of the valley. The forests were more than tall trees. They were places of peace, mystery, and quiet wisdom. Even the mountains, standing silent in the distance, were thought to be ancient guardians watching over the kingdom. Whether these beliefs were true was not the point. They helped people understand the world around them. Every morning, just before sunrise, the temple overlooking the river welcomed its first visitors. The air was cool, and a gentle mist drifted across the valley. Birds sang softly from the nearby trees as the first rays of sunlight touched the stone steps. The temple itself was simple but beautiful. Its walls were built from smooth gray stone gathered from the nearby hills. Strong wooden beams supported the roof, while colorful cloth banners fluttered gently in the morning breeze. Small clay lamps lined the entrance, ready to be lit when evening arrived. Inside, everything was peaceful. There were no loud voices, no hurried footsteps, only the quiet sound of people taking a moment to reflect before beginning another busy day. The priests and priestesses served as guides rather than rulers. They welcomed everyone with kindness, whether they were wealthy merchants or humble farmers. Their role was to care for the temple, lead ceremonies, and remind the people to live with honesty, patience, and respect. They also knew the changing seasons better than almost anyone. They watched the stars at night. They observed the moon as it grew full and then slowly disappeared again. They noticed when birds returned from distant lands or when the first flowers opened each spring. To the people of the kingdom, these natural rhythms were gentle reminders that life moved in cycles. Nothing lasted forever. Not the storms, not the sunshine, not even the greatest kingdoms. Each morning, families brought small offerings to the temple. A basket of fresh grain, a handful of wildflowers, a clay bowl filled with clean river water. These gifts were never about showing wealth. Instead, they were simple acts of gratitude, a quiet way of saying, "Thank you for another day." Children often came with their parents, watching every part of the ceremony with wide, curious eyes. They tried their best to stand still. Sometimes they succeeded. Sometimes a curious child became much more interested in chasing a colorful butterfly than listening to a long prayer. The priests usually smiled, After all, butterflies are very convincing. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, the temple slowly became quieter again. Farmers returned to their fields. Merchants opened their market stalls. Builders picked up their tools. Life continued, but the peaceful moments spent inside the temple stayed with the people throughout the day. They believed that kindness was a strength, patience was a gift, and every good harvest began. With grateful hearts, these simple beliefs became the foundation of the kingdom's traditions. And as the years passed, those traditions would grow into grand festivals, joyful celebrations, and stories that families would share beside warm fires for generations to come. As evening settled over the kingdom, the temple welcomed visitors once again. The golden light of the setting sun slowly faded behind the mountains, and one by one, the small clay lamps around the temple were lit. Their warm glow danced across the stone walls, making the whole building seem peaceful, almost as if it were quietly breathing along with the valley. Families arrived together. Grandparents walked beside young children. Merchants stopped by after a long day in the market. Farmers came with tired hands and dusty sandals, thankful for another successful day's work. The temple belonged to everyone. There were no special seats for the wealthy, no grand entrance reserved for important people. Inside, every person stood side by side. The evening ceremonies were gentle and unhurried. Soft music echoed through the temple as musicians played wooden flutes, small drums, and stringed instruments crafted by local artisans. The slow melodies blended with the sound of the nearby river, creating a calm rhythm that seemed to wash away the worries of the day. If you closed your eyes, it would have been difficult to tell where the music ended and nature began. The people also believed that their ancestors remained part of the kingdom in spirit, not as frightening ghosts hiding in the shadows, but as loving family members whose wisdom continued through the stories they had left behind. During certain evenings, families gathered outside their homes to share those stories. Grandparents spoke of brave hunters who protected the valley, wise builders who raised the first bridges, and kind leaders who always placed the people before themselves. Of course, every storyteller added a little extra excitement now and then. A fish that had once been quite large somehow became the biggest fish anyone had ever seen. A difficult journey over the hills slowly turned into an adventure worthy of 10 songs. Storytelling has always had a wonderful friendship with imagination. No one seemed to mind. The lessons hidden inside the stories mattered far more than every tiny detail. Throughout the year, the kingdom celebrated festivals that marked the changing seasons. The arrival of spring brought music, dancing, and the planting of new crops. Summer celebrated the long days of sunshine and the busy work of the fields. Autumn honored the harvest with tables filled with fresh bread, fruit, roasted vegetables, and sweet honey. Winter became a quieter season, inviting families to gather around warm fires while sharing food, laughter, and memories. The festivals reminded everyone that every season had its purpose. Times of hard work were followed by times of rest. Times of growth were followed by moments of reflection. Nature was the kingdom's greatest teacher. Even the stars held special meaning. On clear nights, people often climbed a nearby hill and looked toward the heavens. They noticed how certain groups of stars returned each year, helping farmers know when to plant, and travelers know which direction to follow. The night sky became both a calendar and a compass. It also inspired wonder. Looking upward, many quietly asked the same questions we still ask today. How large is the world? What lies beyond the stars? Will future generations look up at this same sky? The answers remained hidden. Perhaps that was part of their beauty. As the kingdom's beliefs grew stronger, they also helped unite its people. Families from different villages might speak with different accents or celebrate small traditions in their own way, but they all gathered beneath the same stars, beside the same river, and within the same temple walls. Faith became another thread holding the kingdom together. It gave comfort during difficult times and gratitude during joyful ones. The people believed their peaceful way of life would continue forever. The temples stood proudly. The festivals filled the streets with laughter. The markets welcomed travelers from distant lands. The future seemed brighter than ever, and in many ways it truly was. The kingdom was about to enter its greatest age of prosperity, a time when its cities would flourish, its artists would create remarkable works, and its name would travel farther than anyone had imagined. In our next chapter, we'll step into the kingdom's golden age, when years of hard work, peaceful leadership, and growing trade transformed this hidden valley into one of the most admired civilizations of its time. Chapter 8. The Golden Age, Part 1. By the time another generation had grown up, the little valley beside the river was almost unrecognizable. The quiet villages that had once stood far apart were now connected by well-traveled roads. The market square had become larger than anyone could have imagined years before. New homes stretched beyond the original town, and workshops filled the air with the steady sounds of busy hands at work. If there was ever a time when the people believed their kingdom had reached its brightest days, this was it. Looking around, it was hard to disagree. The fields surrounding the city glowed with healthy crops. Wheat swayed gently in the breeze, like waves upon a golden sea. Fruit trees bent under the weight of ripe apples, figs, and pears. The irrigation canals, built with patience over many years, carried fresh water exactly where it was needed. The harvests had never been better. With full storehouses came something every civilization hopes for: security. Families no longer spent every season wondering if there would be enough food for the winter. Instead, they began thinking about tomorrow, next year, and even the next generation. That kind of confidence changes a society. People dream bigger when they are not worried about their next meal. The city itself reflected this new sense of hope. Builders replaced older wooden buildings with stronger stone structures that could stand for generations. Streets became wider and cleaner. Small gardens appeared beside many homes, filled with colorful flowers and fragrant herbs. The kingdom was not trying to become beautiful. It simply became beautiful because people cared for it. Every morning, workers swept the streets before merchants opened their shops. Wells were kept clean. Bridges were repaired before they became dangerous. Public spaces were treated as if they belonged to every family, because they did. Visitors often remarked on how orderly everything seemed. There was no grand ruler standing on every corner giving commands. Instead, the people shared responsibility. Everyone understood that a peaceful city stayed peaceful only when everyone helped care for. That lesson was passed from parents to children as naturally as learning to plant crops or bake bread. The market had grown into the busiest place in the kingdom. From sunrise until late afternoon, its narrow streets filled with voices from near and far. A merchant from the mountains displayed polished gemstones that shimmered in the sunlight. A trader from distant plains unloaded soft wool woven into warm blankets. Nearby, local craftsmen proudly arranged finely painted pottery, carved furniture, and beautifully woven baskets. It was no longer unusual to hear several different languages spoken in the same morning. Some conversations required patience. Others required creative hand gestures. A few required both. Yet somehow, business usually found a way to happen. Money was important. Trust was even more valuable. Many merchants became friends after years of meeting at the same market stalls. They celebrated one another's successes and offered help when difficult seasons arrived. Trade had created more than wealth. It had created friendships that stretched far beyond the valley. The kingdom also became known for its skilled artists. Stone carvers decorated temples with scenes of rivers, forests, birds, and everyday life. Potters painted beautiful patterns inspired by flowers and the stars above. Weavers created colorful cloth so detailed that travelers often carried it home as treasured gifts. Art was everywhere, not only inside grand buildings. It appeared on simple bowls, wooden doors, market signs, and children's toys. Beauty belonged to everyone. Music flourished as well. Evenings often ended with families gathering in the market square while musicians played. Gentle melodies on flutes, drums, and stringed instruments. Children danced without worrying whether they looked graceful. Adults sometimes joined them, usually after reminding everyone that they were only showing the children how it was done. The children were rarely convinced. Laughter echoed through the streets long after the sun had disappeared behind the mountains. Looking back now, it is easy to see why later generations would remember this period as the kingdom's golden age. Peace filled the valley. The harvests were rich. Trade connected distant lands. Art, music, and learning flourished together. The people believed they had finally found the perfect balance between hard work and happiness. And perhaps for a little while, they truly had. But history has a quiet habit of reminding us that even the brightest sunrise is followed by evening. Far beyond the peaceful valley, the world was changing. New kingdoms were rising. Trade routes were shifting. The weather itself seemed just a little less predictable than before. No one inside the kingdom paid much attention. After all, when life is going well, tomorrow always feels far away. The people simply carried on with their work, grateful for another peaceful day beneath the same familiar sky. Little did they know, the first tiny threads of change had already begun to weave themselves into the story of their remarkable kingdom. And those nearly invisible changes would one day shape its future in ways no one could possibly imagine. As the years of peace continued, the kingdom reached a level of prosperity that earlier generations could hardly have imagined. The streets grew livelier with each passing season. New neighborhoods appeared beyond the old town walls. their homes built from carefully cut stone and topped with sturdy wooden roofs. Trees lined many of the roads, offering welcome shade to travelers during the warm afternoons. The city felt alive, not rushed, not crowded, just comfortably busy. Each morning followed a familiar rhythm that brought comfort to its people. Bakers filled the air with the smell of fresh bread. Blacksmiths opened their workshops before the sun climbed too high. Farmers guided their carts through the city gates, greeting friends they had known since childhood. The kingdom had become a place where routine itself felt like a blessing.